Hey, night owls and deep thinkers. Welcome to a space where ancient myths meet modern minds. Tonight, we dive into the timeless world of Greek mythology. Not as dusty tales, but as living stories that echo our struggles and dreams. These myths are more than old legends. They are mirrors reflecting our deepest fears, hopes, and the complexities of human nature. We'll explore the lives of gods who are far from perfect, flawed, emotional, and surprisingly relatable. From the misunderstood ruler of the underworld to the fierce goddess of wisdom, their stories hold lessons for us all. Greek mythology isn't just about gods throwing lightning bolts or epic battles. It's about family drama, power struggles, love, betrayal, and the search for identity. Themes that resonate deeply with our own lives today. These stories have survived thousands of years because they speak to something universal in the human experience. Think about it. These ancient Greeks were dealing with the same emotional roller coasters we face every day. They understood jealousy, heartbreak, family dysfunction, workplace politics, and the pressure to succeed. They knew what it felt like to be misunderstood, to struggle with mental health, to fight for recognition in a world that doesn't always see your worth. The gods they created weren't perfect beings sitting on clouds judging mortals. They were complex characters with real emotions, making mistakes, learning from consequences, and trying to figure out their place in the universe. Sound familiar? That's because these myths are essentially ancient therapy sessions disguised as epic stories. As we journey through these tales, we'll see how ancient wisdom can shed light on modern challenges like mental health, relationships, leadership, and finding your place in a chaotic world. We'll meet gods who struggle with loneliness, perfectionism, and the pressure to prove themselves. Emotions that hit different when you're scrolling through social media at 2 a.m. Tonight's journey takes us through 3 incredible chapters. First, we'll meet the Olympian family, a group of gods who make your family drama look like a peaceful Sunday dinner. We'll dive into their rivalries, alliances, and secrets, discovering how their stories reflect the dynamics we experience in our own relationships and social circles. Then, we'll journey into the shadows with Hades, the often misunderstood god of the underworld. His story isn't the villain narrative Disney sold us. It's a complex tale of loneliness, responsibility, and the search for connection. We'll explore how his relationship with Persephone gave birth to the seasons, and what that teaches us about balance, boundaries, and seasonal mental health. Finally, we'll meet Athena, the goddess of wisdom and justice, whose strength and intelligence challenge traditional gender roles and inspire us to lead with both heart and mind. Her story is a powerful reminder that true power comes from knowledge, strategy, and the courage to stand up for what's right. These aren't just stories. They're roadmaps for navigating the complexities of modern life. They give us permission to be flawed, to struggle, and to still be worthy of love and respect. They show us that growth comes through challenge, that wisdom is earned through experience, and that even the most powerful beings need connection and understanding. So grab your favorite blanket, maybe some tea or hot chocolate, and settle in for a journey that spans millennia, but feels as relevant as your latest TikTok scroll. Don't forget to like this video if these stories resonate with you. Comment with your thoughts on which god you relate to most, and share this with someone who needs to hear these ancient truths. Ready to meet the gods in a way you've never seen before? Ready to discover how their struggles mirror your own? Ready to find healing in stories that have comforted humans for thousands of years? Let's get started. Let's talk about the ultimate dysfunctional family, the Olympians. If you think your family gatherings are awkward, wait until you hear about these divine dinner parties where someone's always plotting revenge, starting wars, or having affairs with mortals. The Greek gods are basically what happens when you give unlimited power to people who never went to therapy. At the head of this chaotic family tree sits Zeus, the king of the gods, and possibly the worst husband in mythological history. Picture that relative who thinks being the breadwinner gives them permission to do whatever they want. Zeus is the ultimate example of toxic masculinity. He's powerful, charismatic, and absolutely cannot keep his commitments. His list of affairs reads like a phone book, and somehow he always manages to make it everyone else's problem. Then there's Hera, his long-suffering wife, who channels all her rage at Zeus's infidelity into punishing his mistresses and their children. She's that person who stays in a toxic relationship and takes out their frustration on everyone except the actual problem. Hera represents the complicated reality of women, trapped in systems that give them titles but not real power. She's the queen of the gods, But what does that mean when your husband publicly humiliates you and the whole pantheon just shrugs? The sibling dynamics are equally messy. Poseidon, Zeus's brother, rules the seas with an ego that matches his domain's vastness. He's competitive, temperamental, and has serious anger management issues. Basically, that brother who can't handle losing at family game night. When he doesn't get his way, he literally shakes the earth and sends tsunamis. Talk about dramatic. And then there's Hades, the third brother, who got stuck with the underworld while his siblings divided up the more glamorous realms. He's the family member everyone avoids at reunions because his job is too depressing. Imagine being the most responsible sibling, managing the afterlife with efficiency and fairness, but getting excluded from family events because you work in death care. The next generation brings its own flavor of dysfunction. Apollo and Artemis are twins who couldn't be more different. He's the golden child who excels at everything from music to prophecy, while she's the independent one who rejected traditional expectations and chose to remain unmarried. Their relationship reflects the different paths siblings take when dealing with parental pressure and societal expectations. Athena represents the ultimate daddy's girl, born literally from Zeus's head, carrying the weight of being his favorite and the pressure to be perfect. She never had a normal childhood, never had a mother figure, and was expected to be wise and strategic from day one. She's every gifted kid who was told they were mature for their age and then struggled with the burden of constant high expectations. Aphrodite brings all the love drama, turning relationships into battlefields and making everyone question their life choices. She's that friend who's always in the middle of romantic chaos and somehow drags everyone else into it. Her marriage to Hephaestus while having an affair with Ares creates a love triangle that would make reality TV producers weep with joy. Speaking of Hephaestus, he's the disabled god who finds his worth through creativity and craftsmanship. Thrown from Olympus by his own mother because of his appearance, he represents everyone who's been rejected for not fitting conventional standards, yet he becomes the most skilled craftsman among the gods, creating beautiful and powerful items that everyone wants. His story is about finding value in your unique abilities when the world tries to discard you. Ares embodies toxic masculinity in its purest form. He's all about violence, aggression, and proving his worth through conflict. He's that person who thinks being loud and aggressive makes them strong, but actually reveals deep insecurity. Even the other gods find him exhausting, which says something about how destructive unchecked aggression can be. Demeter represents the overprotective parent whose identity is completely wrapped up in their children. When Persephone is taken to the underworld, Demeter's grief literally brings famine to the earth. She's every parent who struggles to let their children grow up and make their own choices, even when those choices involve risk. What makes this family fascinating is how their dynamics mirror our own. The favoritism, the competition for attention, the way trauma gets passed down through generations, the struggle between individual desires and family expectations. It's all there. These gods deal with the same relationship patterns that show up in our families, friend groups, and workplaces. The beauty of Greek mythology is that it doesn't pretend these characters are perfect. They're flawed, complicated, and often make terrible decisions. But that's what makes them relatable. They show us that even divine beings struggle with the same emotional challenges we face, and somehow that makes our own struggles feel more manageable. Picture this: Mount Olympus as the ultimate corporate headquarters, complete with boardroom politics, power struggles, and a CEO who definitely didn't get his position through merit alone. Zeus is basically that boss who inherited the company through a hostile takeover, literally overthrowing his own father Kronos in what can only be described as the most brutal corporate coup in history. This wasn't some peaceful transition of power. It was a violent revolution that completely restructured the divine hierarchy. Each god runs their own department with varying degrees of autonomy and respect. Poseidon commands the maritime division with his trident, controlling all oceanic affairs with the temperament of a middle manager who takes every disagreement personally. Hades oversees what's essentially the afterlife HR department, managing every soul that's ever lived, maintaining perfect records, and ensuring the cosmic justice system runs smoothly. Athena leads the strategic planning and warfare divisions, bringing actual competence and wisdom to a leadership team that often operates on pure ego. But here's where it gets interesting. Having power doesn't automatically translate to respect or inclusion. Hades is the perfect example of this corporate dysfunction. Despite ruling an entire realm and managing the most crucial long-term operations, he's consistently excluded from family meetings and divine councils. He's that department head who handles the most essential but unpleasant work, keeping the entire system functioning while everyone else gets the credit and recognition. Imagine being responsible for literally every human soul that has ever existed, maintaining perfect order in the afterlife, and still being treated like the weird uncle nobody wants to invite to dinner. The gender dynamics in this divine corporate structure are painfully familiar to anyone who's worked in a male-dominated industry. Hera holds the official title of Queen of the Gods. She's essentially the co-CEO, but constantly has to fight for actual decision-making power. Her struggles mirror those of countless women in leadership positions who discover that having the title doesn't automatically grant you the authority or respect that should come with it. She spends enormous energy trying to assert influence over decisions that affect both gods and mortals, often resorting to indirect methods because direct confrontation with Zeus rarely works. Athena represents the woman who has to be twice as good to get half the recognition. Born from Zeus's head, literally embodying the phrase "daddy's girl," she carries the burden of being both his favorite and having to constantly prove she deserves her position. She challenges traditional gender roles by excelling in warfare and strategy, fields typically dominated by male gods, and faces the exhausting reality of having to demonstrate her competence repeatedly. Every decision she makes is scrutinized more heavily than her male counterparts, every success attributed to her father's favor rather than her own abilities. Artemis takes a completely different approach. She opts out of the traditional power structure entirely. Rather than fighting for recognition within a system that undervalues her, she chooses independence over marriage and political alliances. She represents those who reject societal expectations and forge their own paths, understanding that sometimes the only way to maintain your integrity is to step outside systems that weren't designed for you. These divine power struggles aren't just ancient history. They're a mirror reflecting the workplace politics, family hierarchies, and social expectations we navigate every day. The gods might have supernatural abilities, but they wrestle with very human issues of recognition, respect, and finding their voice in complex organizational structures. Their stories remind us that leadership isn't just about wielding authority. It's about earning trust, balancing competing interests, and sometimes fighting for your rightful place at the decision-making table. The emotional toll of leadership is another theme that runs through these mythological power dynamics. Zeus, despite his ultimate authority, constantly struggles with insecurity and the pressure to maintain control over both his volatile family and the mortal world. His leadership style, authoritarian, impulsive, and often reactive, creates more problems than it solves. Poseidon's temperamental nature demonstrates how unchecked emotions can disrupt even the most powerful institutions. When he doesn't get his way, he literally shakes the earth and sends tsunamis, showing us what happens when leaders lack emotional regulation. Hera's relentless pursuit of influence reveals the exhausting fight for recognition that many women face in patriarchal systems. Her anger and frustration, while often misdirected, stem from the legitimate grievance of being denied the power that should come with her position. Even Athena, with all her wisdom and strategic thinking, faces the ongoing challenge of balancing strength with empathy, proving that effective leadership requires emotional intelligence as much as tactical skill. What makes these ancient stories so relevant is how they illuminate the complexity of power itself. The Olympians show us that authority isn't just about dominance or control. It's about collaboration, empathy, and respect. Their struggles encourage us to rethink what it means to lead effectively and to find strength in vulnerability and genuine connection with others. So the next time you're dealing with office politics, family drama, or navigating complex social hierarchies, remember that the gods are right there with you. They're wrestling with their own complicated power plays, emotional battles, and the challenge of maintaining relationships while exercising authority. It's oddly comforting to know that these ancient stories still hold lessons for us in the modern world, teaching us about resilience, strategic thinking, and the emotional intelligence required for authentic leadership. In the end, the gods' stories serve as a mirror reflecting our own challenges with authority, family dynamics, and identity formation. They remind us that even those who appear all-powerful face doubts, conflicts, and the ongoing need for personal growth. And perhaps most importantly, they show us that true power comes not from position or title, but from how we treat others and the positive impact we have on the world around us. Let's shine a light on the gods who don't get the spotlight but carry immense weight in their own ways. Hades, the ruler of the underworld, is often seen as the grim reaper figure, but he's much more than that. A misunderstood sibling who manages the realm of the dead with fairness and dedication. Despite his crucial role, he's excluded from many divine gatherings, reflecting how society often sidelines those who do the hard, unseen work. Hades' story is one of quiet strength and resilience. While his brothers Zeus and Poseidon enjoy the glory of ruling the sky and sea, Hades governs the underworld, a realm that mortals fear and avoid thinking about. This isolation mirrors the experience of many who work behind the scenes in our world, doing essential jobs that rarely get recognition or applause. Yet, Hades takes his responsibilities seriously, ensuring that the balance between life and death is maintained with justice and order. He is not the villain many make him out to be. Instead, he is a guardian of natural cycles and a keeper of souls, embodying the difficult but necessary role of facing mortality. His exclusion from family events and divine councils highlights a painful truth about how society often shuns those who deal with uncomfortable realities. Hades' loneliness is palpable, yet he remains steadfast, showing us the power of dedication even when unappreciated. Think about the healthcare workers, funeral directors, therapists, and social workers in our world. People who handle life's most challenging moments while others look away. Like Hades, they carry the weight of essential work that keeps society functioning, often without the recognition they deserve. Then there's Hephaestus, the god of fire, metalworking, and craftsmanship, whose story is a powerful testament to overcoming adversity. Born with a physical disability, Hephaestus was cast out of Olympus by his own mother, Hera, because she saw him as imperfect. Despite this rejection, he turned his pain into creativity, becoming the divine blacksmith who forged weapons and armor for gods and heroes alike. His workshop was a place of magic and innovation, proving that true strength lies not in physical perfection but in skill, perseverance, and heart. Hephaestus' journey resonates deeply with anyone who has felt marginalized or undervalued because of their differences. His story encourages us to embrace our unique talents and to find pride in what we create, rather than how we look or conform to societal standards. His resilience teaches us that setbacks can be transformed into sources of power, and that creativity can flourish even in the face of rejection. In our modern world, he represents every artist, inventor, and creator who has been told they don't fit the mold, but continues to build something beautiful anyway. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and the moon, represents another form of divine independence. She chose to reject traditional female roles, remaining unmarried and dedicating herself to protecting nature and the vulnerable. Artemis embodies the spirit of self-determination and challenges societal expectations that often pressure women to conform to specific roles or behaviors. Her fierce independence and commitment to her own path inspire those who feel constrained by societal norms or expectations. Artemis shows us that choosing a different path is not only valid, but can be a source of great strength and fulfillment. She is a protector of the marginalized and a symbol of empowerment for those who refuse to be boxed in by tradition. In today's world, she represents every person who has chosen career over marriage, activism over comfort, or authenticity over acceptance. Her story reminds us that there's power in saying no to expectations that don't serve us. These outcasts and underdogs show us that being different doesn't mean being less. Their stories encourage us to find strength in our uniqueness and to embrace the roles that might not be glamorous but are essential in a world that often values popularity and visibility. These gods teach us the power of quiet resilience and authenticity. They remind us that the most important work often happens in the shadows, away from applause and recognition. Their struggles mirror those of many people today who feel overlooked or undervalued, whether due to physical differences, unconventional choices, or simply working behind the scenes. By understanding these divine figures, we gain insight into our own experiences of exclusion and the courage it takes to stand firm in our identity. They remind us that worth is not determined by external validation, but by inner strength and integrity. So next time you feel like the odd one out, remember Hades, Hephaestus, and Artemis, gods who turned their challenges into strengths and found their own kind of power. Their stories remind us that true worth comes from within, and that sometimes the most important roles are the ones no one else wants to play. They teach us that resilience, creativity, and independence are not just traits of gods, but qualities that live within each of us. In embracing their stories, we learn to celebrate our differences and recognize that every role, no matter how hidden or unconventional, contributes to the greater story of life. So stand tall in your uniqueness, knowing that like these divine outcasts, your value is immeasurable and your journey is powerful. Remember, sometimes the quietest voices carry the most profound wisdom, and the unseen hands build the strongest foundations. Here's what absolutely blew my mind when I first really studied these myths. The Greek gods aren't emotionally evolved beings who have transcended human feelings. They're basically immortal humans with superpowers and all the messy, complicated emotions that come with existing in relationships and society. They get jealous, they fall in love with the wrong people, they make impulsive decisions they regret later, and they struggle with mental health in ways that feel incredibly familiar to anyone scrolling through social media at 2 a.m. Take Zeus, for example, the king of the gods who should theoretically have it all figured out. Instead, he's constantly seeking validation through affairs and power plays, like that person who can't stop checking their notifications because they need constant reassurance that they matter. His infidelity isn't just about desire. It's about an insatiable need for admiration and control that stems from deep insecurity. He's terrified of being overthrown the way he overthrew his own father, so he makes increasingly desperate attempts to maintain his position through fear and manipulation. Hera's emotional journey is even more complex and heartbreaking. She's trapped in a public marriage where her husband's infidelities are literally legendary, and instead of confronting the real problem, she channels all her rage toward his mistresses and their children. This pattern, attacking other women instead of holding the actual perpetrator accountable, is something we see played out in modern relationships and social media drama constantly. Hera represents the complicated reality of women who have been gaslit into believing that their partner's behavior is somehow other people's fault. Her jealousy isn't just petty divine drama. It's the emotional response of someone whose identity and worth have been tied to a relationship that consistently undermines her. She's dealing with what we'd now recognize as emotional abuse, public humiliation, and the impossible position of maintaining dignity while everyone around her treats her pain as entertainment. When she punishes Io or Leto or any of Zeus's other lovers, she's not being cruel for cruelty's sake. She's a woman in pain lashing out because she has no other outlet for her legitimate anger. Poseidon embodies what happens when someone never learned healthy emotional regulation. Every slight, every perceived disrespect, every moment when he doesn't get his way results in literal earthquakes and tsunamis. He's that person who explodes over minor inconveniences because they never develop the tools to process disappointment or frustration. His emotional volatility affects everyone around him. Mortals die when Poseidon has a bad day, which is a pretty intense metaphor for how unchecked emotions can have devastating ripple effects. But it's not just anger and jealousy. These gods experience the full spectrum of human emotional struggle. Demeter's grief when Persephone is taken is so profound that it literally brings winter to the world. Her depression is so severe that nothing can grow, nothing can flourish, and the entire earth becomes a reflection of her internal landscape. Anyone who's experienced major loss or depression knows that feeling when your inner world is so dark that it feels like the whole universe has gone cold. Apollo, despite being the god of light and music, struggles with rejection and unrequited love in ways that would make any modern person cringe with recognition. His pursuit of Daphne, who literally transforms into a tree to escape him, is a story about not taking no for an answer, and the toxic persistence that many people mistake for romantic dedication. His emotional immaturity shows us how even the most talented and privileged people can completely fail at basic human connection when they're driven by ego rather than empathy. Athena's emotional struggles are more subtle but equally relatable. Born from Zeus's head without a mother, she carries the weight of being the perfect daughter while never having experienced normal childhood development. She's that gifted kid who was told they were mature for their age and then struggled with the burden of constant high expectations. Her perfectionism and need to prove herself constantly stem from never having unconditional love or acceptance. Everything she received was tied to her performance and usefulness. Even Aphrodite, the goddess of love, has a complicated relationship with her own emotions. She's married to Hephaestus but having an affair with Ares, creating love triangles and emotional chaos wherever she goes. Her story reflects how someone can be an expert at creating passion and attraction, while being completely unable to maintain stable, healthy relationships. She represents that friend who gives amazing dating advice but whose own love life is a constant disaster. What makes these divine emotional struggles so powerful is that they give us permission to be complex, flawed, and still worthy of love and respect. The gods don't have their emotions figured out, and they're literally immortal beings with unlimited power. If they can struggle with jealousy, depression, anger, and insecurity, then maybe it's okay that we do too. Their stories normalize the human experience of emotional messiness, while also showing us the consequences of not dealing with our feelings in healthy ways. These myths remind us that emotions aren't weaknesses to be overcome. They're part of the human experience that needs to be understood, processed, and channeled constructively. The gods who learn to manage their emotions become wiser and more effective leaders, while those who remain slaves to their impulses create chaos and suffering. Their stories are essentially ancient therapy sessions, showing us different ways of coping with the universal challenges of existence. In our modern world of social media perfectionism and emotional suppression, these divine struggles offer a refreshing reminder that everyone, even gods, deals with mental health challenges, relationship drama, and the ongoing work of emotional growth. They teach us that healing isn't about becoming emotionless, it's about learning to feel deeply while acting wisely. There's something profoundly therapeutic about discovering that even the gods struggle with the same emotional battles we face every day. These ancient stories aren't just entertainment, they're medicine for the soul, offering us a framework for understanding our own pain and a path toward healing. When we see Zeus wrestling with insecurity despite his ultimate power, or Hera dealing with betrayal and public humiliation, we realize that our struggles aren't signs of weakness. They're part of the universal human experience. Greek mythology gives us permission to be complex, contradictory, and still worthy of love. In a world that often demands we present perfect versions of ourselves on social media, these gods show us that even divine beings are messy, make mistakes, and spend centuries learning how to be better. They remind us that growth isn't a destination but a continuous journey, and that wisdom comes through experience, not perfection. The therapeutic power of these stories lies in their ability to normalize our emotional experiences. When you're struggling with depression, Demeter's grief that brings winter to the world validates the magnitude of your pain. When you're dealing with family dysfunction, the Olympian chaos reminds you that even the most powerful families have their problems. When you're fighting for recognition in a male-dominated space, Athena's battles give you strength and strategy. These myths also teach us about the consequences of unprocessed emotions and unhealthy coping mechanisms. Poseidon's earthquakes when he's angry show us what happens when we don't learn emotional regulation. Hera's misdirected rage toward other women instead of her unfaithful husband illustrates how trauma can make us attack the wrong targets. Apollo's inability to accept rejection demonstrates the toxicity of entitlement in relationships. By seeing these patterns played out in mythological form, we can recognize them in our own lives and choose different paths. But perhaps most importantly, these stories show us that healing is possible. The gods who learn to channel their emotions constructively become wiser and more effective leaders. Athena transforms her pressure to be perfect into strategic thinking that helps others. Hades learns to respect boundaries and share power in his relationship with Persephone. Even Zeus, in some versions of the myths, eventually learns to be a more balanced ruler. Their journeys remind us that change is possible at any stage of life. The archetypal nature of these characters also helps us understand different aspects of our own personalities. We all have an inner Zeus that craves power and validation, an inner Hera that feels betrayed and angry, an inner Athena that strives for perfection, and an inner Hades that feels misunderstood and isolated. By recognizing these different parts of ourselves, we can work with them more consciously instead of being controlled by them. These stories create a safe space for exploring difficult emotions and situations. When we're angry, we can channel Artemis's fierce independence rather than Ares's destructive rage. When we're heartbroken, we can learn from Demeter's journey through grief rather than getting stuck in eternal winter. When we feel overlooked, we can find strength in Hades's quiet dignity rather than Poseidon's explosive demands for attention. The healing power of mythology also lies in its ability to connect us across time and culture. These stories have comforted humans for thousands of years because they speak to something universal in our experience. Knowing that people in ancient Greece were dealing with the same relationship drama, family dysfunction, and identity crises that we face today creates a sense of continuity and belonging. We're not alone in our struggles. We're part of a long line of humans trying to figure out how to live with meaning and connection. Greek myths also offer us multiple perspectives on the same situations, teaching us that there's rarely just one way to interpret events. The story of Pandora can be seen as a cautionary tale about curiosity, or as a story about the necessity of hope in a difficult world. Medusa can be viewed as a monster, or as a victim of assault who was further punished for her trauma. This multiplicity of interpretations mirrors the complexity of real life and helps us develop nuanced thinking about our own experiences. The gods' stories also demonstrate the importance of community and connection in healing. Even the most powerful beings need relationships, support, and understanding. Athena's role as a mentor shows us the healing power of guiding others through challenges we've faced ourselves. Hades' eventual partnership with Persephone illustrates how sharing our burdens can make them more bearable. The Olympian family, despite all their dysfunction, ultimately comes together when facing external threats. As we prepare to dive deeper into the specific stories of Hades and Athena, remember that you're not just learning about ancient mythology. You're exploring timeless patterns of human experience that can offer insight, comfort, and guidance for your own journey. These gods have been waiting thousands of years to share their wisdom with you. They've made the mistake so you don't have to. Face the darkness so you can find the light, and learned the hard lessons so you can benefit from their experience. Let their stories remind you that you're not broken for struggling. You're human. You're not weak for feeling deeply. You're alive. And you're not alone in your journey. You're a part of an ancient tradition of souls seeking meaning, connection, and growth. Now, let's meet two gods whose stories will show you just how powerful that journey can be. Let's talk about Hades, the god who got the worst deal in divine history and somehow still managed to be the most responsible one in the family. While Disney painted him as a blue-flamed villain with anger management issues, the real Hades is actually the most misunderstood character in Greek mythology. And honestly, his story hits different when you realize he's basically the middle child who got stuck with the family business nobody wanted. Picture this. You're born into a family where your father is literally eating his children because he's paranoid about being overthrown. Kronos, the original toxic parent, swallowed each of his kids the moment they were born, keeping them trapped in his stomach like the world's most disturbing timeout. Hades spent his earliest existence in complete darkness, surrounded by his siblings, all of them waiting for someone to save them. That's some serious childhood trauma right there. Imagine trying to explain that origin story at therapy. When Zeus finally rescued them and they overthrew their father, it was time to divide up the world. The three brothers drew lots to determine who would rule what. And while Zeus got the sky and Poseidon claimed the seas, Hades drew the underworld. Not exactly the prize anyone would choose, right? While his brothers got domains that were visible, celebrated, and full of life, Hades inherited the realm of the dead, a place that mortals feared to even think about. But here's what makes Hades fascinating. He didn't complain. He didn't throw tantrums like Poseidon or start affairs like Zeus. He accepted his role and threw himself into building something meaningful from what others saw as a curse. The underworld under Hades' rule wasn't the fiery torture chamber of Christian hell. It was a complex, well-organized realm where souls were judged fairly and sent to their appropriate destinations. Think about the emotional weight of that responsibility. Every single human who has ever lived eventually becomes Hades' responsibility. He has to manage the afterlife for billions of souls, ensuring that justice is served and that the natural order between life and death is maintained. He's essentially running the most important customer service department in existence. And unlike his brothers, he can't just ignore his duties when he's having a bad day. The loneliness of his position is heartbreaking when you really think about it. While Zeus throws parties on Mount Olympus and Poseidon enjoys the worship of sailors, Hades rules over a realm that everyone fears. He's the family member who gets excluded from gatherings because his job is too depressing. Imagine being the most reliable sibling, the one who actually does his job with integrity and fairness, but getting treated like the weird uncle nobody wants to invite to dinner. This isolation mirrors the experience of so many people in our modern world who do essential but underappreciated work. Think about healthcare workers, funeral directors, therapists, social workers, people who deal with life's most difficult realities while others look away. Like Hades, they carry the emotional weight of managing what society needs but doesn't want to acknowledge. They're essential to keeping our world functioning, but they often work in the shadows, undervalued and misunderstood. Hades also represents the middle child experience in its purest form. Zeus is the golden child who can do no wrong. Poseidon is the temperamental baby who gets attention through drama. And Hades is the responsible one who quietly handles the hard stuff. He's the sibling who takes care of aging parents while the others are too busy with their own lives. He's the one who manages family crises while everyone else gets to maintain their fun, carefree image. But what's beautiful about Hades is his quiet dignity. He doesn't seek validation or recognition for his work. He doesn't try to make his realm more appealing or market himself better to improve his reputation. He simply does what needs to be done, day after day, century after century, with a level of consistency and integrity that puts his more famous brothers to shame. His story challenges our modern obsession with visibility and external validation. In a world of social media metrics and personal branding, Hades reminds us that some of the most important work happens behind the scenes. He shows us that true strength isn't about being seen or celebrated. It's about showing up consistently for the responsibilities that matter, even when no one is watching or appreciating your efforts. The Underworld under Hades' management is actually a marvel of organization and justice. He created a system where souls are judged fairly by 3 judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, and sent to appropriate destinations based on their actions in life. The virtuous go to the Elysian Fields, the wicked to Tartarus, and most people to the Asphodel Meadows. It's a system based on merit and justice, not arbitrary divine whims. This attention to fairness and order reveals something profound about Hades' character. Despite being dealt the worst hand in the divine lottery, he chose to create something meaningful and just. He turned his burden into a calling, his isolation into an opportunity to build something that truly mattered. In our modern context, he represents everyone who has taken a difficult situation and found a way to serve others through it. As we continue with Hades' story, we'll see how his loneliness eventually leads him to make a decision that changes everything. His encounter with Persephone. But for now, let's sit with the image of this forgotten middle child, ruling his shadowy realm with quiet dignity, carrying the weight of death itself while his brothers bask in the glory of life. His story reminds us that sometimes the most important roles are the ones nobody else wants to play. While Zeus was busy managing his public image and Poseidon was throwing oceanic tantrums, Hades was quietly building the most sophisticated governmental system in the ancient world. The Underworld wasn't just a dumping ground for souls, it was a complex, multi-layered civilization that required the organizational skills of a master administrator and the emotional intelligence of a therapist. Imagine being handed a realm of infinite darkness and somehow turning it into a functioning society where justice actually prevails. The scale of Hades' operation is mind-boggling when you really think about it. Every human who has ever lived, from ancient cave dwellers to modern-day influencers, eventually becomes his responsibility. He has to process their souls, evaluate their life choices, and assign them to appropriate afterlife accommodations. It's like being the ultimate HR manager for humanity, except the stakes are eternal, and there's no employee handbook for managing the dead. Hades created a 3-tier justice system that would make modern legal scholars weep with envy. He appointed 3 judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, to evaluate souls based on their earthly actions. The virtuous earned their place in the Elysian Fields, a paradise reserved for heroes and the exceptionally good. The wicked were sent to Tartarus, a place of punishment that actually fit their crimes. And the vast majority of souls, the regular people who were neither saints nor sinners, found their home in the Asphodel Meadows, a peaceful if somewhat monotonous existence. This system reveals something profound about Hades' character. He believes in fairness over favoritism. Unlike his brothers, who often let personal relationships influence their decisions, Hades created a merit-based system where your afterlife depends on your actions, not your connections. In our modern world of nepotism and privilege, there's something refreshing about a leader who actually judges people based on their character and choices. But managing the Underworld wasn't just about administrative efficiency. It required incredible emotional resilience. Every day, Hades had to witness the full spectrum of human suffering and triumph. He saw the souls of murder victims arriving alongside their killers, parents grieving children who died too young, lovers separated by death's cruel timing. He had to maintain his composure and make fair decisions while being constantly surrounded by humanity's deepest pain. Think about the psychological toll of that responsibility. Modern therapists and social workers burn out after years of dealing with human trauma, but Hades has been doing this job for millennia without vacation, without recognition, and without the support systems that help people in caring professions maintain their mental health. He's essentially the ultimate first responder, dealing with every human crisis that has ever existed. The loneliness of his position becomes even more apparent when you consider the nature of his work. While Zeus gets to enjoy the worship and gratitude of mortals, and Poseidon receives offerings from sailors seeking safe passage, Hades is feared and avoided. Nobody prays to the god of the dead unless they're desperate. And even then, they do it reluctantly. He's providing the most essential service in existence, managing the afterlife, but getting none of the appreciation. This dynamic mirrors the experience of so many essential workers in our modern world. The people who clean our hospitals, process our waste, work in morgues, or provide end-of-life care are absolutely crucial to society's functioning, but they're often invisible and undervalued. Like Hades, they do the work that nobody else wants to do, and they do it with professionalism and dignity despite the lack of recognition. Hades also had to manage a complex ecosystem of underworld creatures and deities. Cerberus, the three-headed dog, wasn't just a pet. He was a security system designed to keep the living out and the dead in. The Furies enforced divine justice, hunting down those who had escaped earthly punishment. Charon ferried souls across the river Styx, ensuring that proper protocols were followed. Hades had to coordinate all these moving parts while maintaining the delicate balance between life and death. The underworld under Hades' rule was also a place of surprising innovation. He created the concept of different afterlife destinations based on moral behavior, an idea that would later influence major world religions. He established the principle that death was not the end, but a transition to a different form of existence. He even allowed for the possibility of redemption and second chances, as seen in stories of heroes who were permitted to return from the dead. What's remarkable is how Hades maintained his integrity despite the corrupting influence of absolute power. Unlike his brothers, who frequently abused their positions for personal gain, Hades remained committed to justice and fairness. He didn't play favorites, he didn't accept bribes, and he didn't let personal relationships interfere with his professional responsibilities. In a family notorious for its dysfunction and abuse of power, Hades stood out as the one who actually took his job seriously. The emotional cost of this isolation and responsibility is something we can all relate to in our modern world. How many of us have felt like we're carrying burdens that others don't understand or appreciate? How many of us have done essential work that goes unrecognized while others get credit for flashier, but less important contributions? Hades' story validates those feelings while also showing us that there's dignity and meaning in doing important work, even when it's thankless. His leadership style also offers lessons for modern managers and leaders. He created systems that could function without his constant oversight. He delegated appropriately while maintaining accountability, and he treated his subordinates with respect. The underworld ran smoothly because Hades understood that good leadership is about creating sustainable systems, not micromanaging every detail. As we'll see in the next part of his story, this isolation and dedication to duty eventually led Hades to make a decision that would change everything. His encounter with Persephone, but his years of building and managing the underworld alone prepared him for the complexities of that relationship and the negotiations that would follow. The skills he developed as a ruler, patience, fairness, and the ability to see the bigger picture, would serve him well in matters of the heart. For now, let's appreciate Hades as the ultimate example of leadership through service. He shows us that true power isn't about domination or recognition. It's about taking responsibility for what matters and doing the work that needs to be done, even when nobody is watching. Loneliness is a powerful force, and for Hades, it was both a burden and a catalyst for one of the most controversial stories in Greek mythology. His encounter with Persephone. After centuries of ruling the underworld in isolation, managing the souls of the dead while being feared and avoided by both gods and mortals, Hades reached a breaking point that would change everything. His story isn't the simple villain narrative we've been told. It's a complex exploration of how isolation can drive even the most responsible people to make decisions they'll later regret. Picture this. You've been doing essential work for centuries, maintaining the cosmic balance between life and death, ensuring justice for every soul that passes through your realm. You're competent, fair, and dedicated, but you're also profoundly alone. Your family excludes you from gatherings because your job is too depressing. Mortals fear even speaking your name, and your only companions are the souls of the dead who can't exactly provide the emotional connection you crave. That's the psychological state Hades was in when he first saw Persephone. The moment Hades laid eyes on Persephone, something shifted in his carefully controlled world. Here was this vibrant, beautiful goddess picking flowers in a meadow, radiating the kind of life and joy that had been absent from his existence for millennia. For someone who had spent so long surrounded by death and darkness, Persephone represented everything he had been missing: light, warmth, and the possibility of genuine connection. It's like that moment when someone who's been isolated for months finally meets someone who makes them feel seen and understood. But here's where loneliness becomes dangerous. Instead of approaching Persephone with respect and patience, Hades made a decision that would haunt him forever. He abducted her, taking her to the Underworld to be his queen. This wasn't the calculated move of a villain. It was the desperate act of someone so starved for connection that he convinced himself that possession was the same as love. He thought that if he could just get her to his realm, he could make her understand, make her see that they belonged together. From our modern perspective, Hades' actions represent a textbook example of how loneliness can lead to boundary violations and toxic behavior. He was so focused on his own need for connection that he completely ignored Persephone's agency and consent. This pattern shows up in contemporary relationships all the time. People who are so afraid of being alone that they try to control or manipulate others into staying with them. It's the person who won't take no for an answer, who thinks persistence is romantic rather than harassment. What makes Hades' story particularly relevant to Gen Z is how it reflects the dangers of emotional desperation in the age of social media and digital connection. We live in a time when people can feel profoundly isolated despite being constantly connected online. The pressure to find the one or to avoid being alone can drive people to make poor decisions in dating apps, to ignore red flags, or to stay in unhealthy relationships because being with someone, anyone, feels better than being alone. The psychological complexity of Hades' situation is what makes this myth so powerful. He wasn't acting out of malice or evil intent. He was acting out of pain. Centuries of isolation had warped his understanding of healthy relationships. He had no model for how to connect with someone as an equal because his entire existence had been defined by power imbalances and fear. The souls in his realm couldn't leave, his family avoided him, and mortals trembled at his name. In that context, the idea of asking someone to choose to be with him probably felt impossible. This doesn't excuse his actions, but it helps us understand them in a way that's more nuanced than simple good versus evil. Hades represents the part of us that's so afraid of rejection that we sometimes try to control outcomes instead of accepting the risk that comes with genuine vulnerability. He shows us what happens when we let our fear of loneliness override our respect for others' autonomy. The immediate aftermath of Hades' decision reveals the true cost of acting from desperation rather than wisdom. Persephone was terrified and heartbroken, torn away from her mother and the world she knew. Demeter's grief was so profound that she stopped the earth from producing food, causing widespread famine and suffering. What Hades thought would solve his loneliness actually created more pain and isolation than ever before. This ripple effect is something we see in modern toxic relationships too. When someone tries to force connection through control or manipulation, it doesn't just hurt their target, it affects families, friend groups, and entire communities. The person who isolates their partner from friends and family, the one who uses emotional manipulation to prevent breakups, the individual who can't accept that a relationship is over, they all create expanding circles of damage that go far beyond their original intention. What's particularly tragic about Hades' story is that his fundamental need was legitimate. He did deserve love and companionship. His loneliness was real and understandable given his circumstances, but his method of trying to meet that need was fundamentally flawed because it was based on taking rather than giving, on control rather than trust. He wanted to be loved but wasn't willing to risk being rejected. So he tried to create a situation where rejection was impossible. The myth also highlights how isolation can distort our perception of normal social interaction. Hades had been alone for so long that he had forgotten how to connect with others as equals. His understanding of relationships was based on power dynamics, ruler and subject, judge and soul, rather than mutual respect and choice. This is something we see in people who have been isolated for long periods, whether through depression, social anxiety, or circumstances beyond their control. For Gen Z, who are dealing with unprecedented levels of loneliness exacerbated by social media, economic uncertainty, and global crises, Hades' story serves as both a warning and a source of hope. It warns against letting desperation drive our relationship choices and reminds us that healthy connections require patience, respect, and the willingness to be vulnerable without guarantees. But it also shows us that even someone who makes terrible decisions out of loneliness can learn and grow. As we'll see in the next part of Hades' story, his relationship with Persephone doesn't end with the abduction. The consequences of his actions force him to confront the reality of what he's done and begin the difficult work of learning how to love someone without trying to control them. His journey from desperate possession to genuine partnership offers hope for anyone who has ever made poor decisions driven by loneliness or fear. The story of Hades and Persephone doesn't end with just an abduction. It's a tale about how trauma doesn't stay contained. It ripples out, affecting everyone around us in ways we might not expect. When Persephone was taken to the Underworld, her mother Demeter's grief was so overwhelming that it literally stopped the earth from producing food. Crops withered, animals starved, and humans faced famine. A devastating consequence of one mother's heartbreak. Demeter's pain wasn't just personal. It became a global crisis. Her sorrow was so intense that it changed the natural order, showing us how deeply interconnected our emotional states are with the world around us. This myth is a powerful metaphor for how trauma and grief don't just affect the individual. They impact families, communities, and even societies. When one person suffers, the effects can cascade outward, creating waves of pain and disruption that touch many lives. Think about the modern parallels. A family member's loss or trauma can change the dynamics of an entire household. A community grieving a tragedy can experience collective depression or unrest. Even on a larger scale, societal trauma, like war, natural disasters, or pandemics, leaves scars that last generations. Demeter's reaction also highlights the dangers of unprocessed grief and the importance of finding healthy ways to cope. Her refusal to eat or tend to the earth was a manifestation of her despair, but it also caused harm to everyone else. This shows us that while grief is natural and necessary, it can become destructive if it isolates us or prevents us from engaging with the world. The myth also explores the theme of negotiation and compromise in healing trauma. Eventually, Zeus intervened to broker a deal that allowed Persephone to spend part of the year with Hades and part with Demeter. This arrangement restored balance to the earth, symbolizing the cyclical nature of grief and recovery. The changing seasons, spring's rebirth, summer's growth, autumn's decline, and winter's dormancy, become a living metaphor for the human experience of loss and renewal. Just as the earth cycles through periods of abundance and scarcity, we too move through phases of healing and hardship. For Gen Z, who face unprecedented levels of collective trauma from climate change, social upheaval, and global crises, this myth offers both validation and hope. It acknowledges that pain is real and far-reaching, but also that recovery is possible through connection, compromise, and time. Demeter's story reminds us that grief is not a linear process. It's messy, cyclical, and deeply personal. Sometimes we feel like the earth is barren and lifeless inside us, and other times we bloom with new energy and hope. Recognizing this rhythm can help us be kinder to ourselves and others during difficult times. The ripple effects of trauma also teach us about the importance of community support. Demeter's isolation and her grief caused widespread suffering. But when she was able to reconnect with her daughter and the other gods, balance was restored. This shows us that healing often requires reaching out, sharing our pain, and accepting help from others. The myth also challenges us to think about how we respond to others' pain. Are we compassionate and patient, or do we expect people to get over it quickly? Do we recognize the invisible burdens others carry, or do we judge them for their struggles? Demeter's story encourages empathy and understanding, reminding us that trauma can affect anyone and that healing is a collective journey. In the context of Hades and Persephone, the ripple effects of trauma also highlight the complexity of relationships affected by past wounds. Persephone's time in the underworld changes her, and her relationship with Hades evolves from one of captivity to partnership. This transformation shows that even relationships born from pain can grow into something meaningful with effort and understanding. The myth doesn't shy away from the difficult emotions involved: fear, anger, betrayal, and sorrow. But it also offers a path toward reconciliation and balance. It teaches us that trauma doesn't have to define us, and that through compassion and negotiation, we can find ways to coexist with our pain and with each other. For those navigating their own difficult relationships or personal traumas, this story offers a powerful reminder that healing is possible, but it requires patience, communication, and sometimes compromise. It's a call to acknowledge the pain, respect boundaries, and work toward mutual understanding. Ultimately, the ripple effects of trauma in this myth remind us that our actions and emotions don't exist in isolation. They affect the people around us and the world we live in. By recognizing this interconnectedness, we can approach our struggles with greater awareness and care. As we continue exploring Hades' story, keep in mind that the challenges he faces are not just his own. They ripple outward, touching the lives of gods and mortals alike. His journey is a testament to the power of resilience, the necessity of empathy, and the hope that even the darkest experiences can lead to growth and renewal. So let's honor the complexity of trauma and the strength it takes to heal, because in that process we find not only ourselves but also the connections that make life meaningful. The resolution of Hades and Persephone's story isn't just about divine compromise, it's about learning to find balance in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. The arrangement that Zeus negotiated, where Persephone spends 6 months in the underworld with Hades and 6 months on Earth with Demeter, created the seasonal cycle that governs our natural world. But more than that, it offers us a profound metaphor for how we can navigate the inevitable ups and downs of life, relationships, and mental health. Think about what this compromise actually represents. It's an acknowledgement that life isn't meant to be constant spring. We can't live in perpetual growth, endless sunshine, or permanent happiness. The seasons teach us that there's wisdom in cycles, that periods of dormancy and darkness are just as necessary as times of bloom and abundance. For Gen Z, who are often pressured to be constantly productive, always optimizing, and perpetually on, this ancient wisdom feels revolutionary. Persephone's dual existence shows us that we can hold multiple identities and roles without losing ourselves. She's both the innocent flower-picking maiden and the powerful queen of the underworld. She embodies light and darkness, life and death, joy and solemnity. In our modern world, where we're often told to pick a lane or maintain consistent personal brands, Persephone's story gives us permission to be complex, multifaceted beings who can thrive in different environments. The seasonal metaphor also speaks directly to the experience of seasonal depression and mental health cycles that so many people face. Just as the earth goes through periods of dormancy in winter, our minds and spirits sometimes need rest, reflection, and retreat. The myth validates these natural rhythms instead of pathologizing them. It suggests that our winter periods, times of sadness, introspection, or low energy, aren't failures or flaws but necessary parts of the human experience. For Hades, this arrangement represents a profound lesson in letting go and sharing power. He had to learn that love isn't about possession or control. It's about creating space for the other person to be fully themselves. His willingness to let Persephone return to the surface world for half the year shows growth from the desperate, lonely god who first abducted her. He learned that true partnership requires trust, compromise, and the courage to risk loss for the sake of the other person's well-being. This evolution in Hades' character offers hope for anyone who has ever acted from a place of desperation or fear in relationships. It shows that people can change, that toxic patterns can be broken, and that even relationships that begin in darkness can grow into something healthy and balanced. The key is recognizing when our behavior is driven by our own wounds rather than genuine care for the other person. The seasonal cycle also teaches us about the importance of boundaries and transitions. Persephone doesn't just randomly bounce between worlds. There are clear agreements about when she goes where and why. This structure provides stability within change, showing us that healthy relationships require clear communication about needs, expectations, and limits. It's a reminder that compromise doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding ways to honor everyone's needs within a sustainable framework. From Demeter's perspective, the seasonal arrangement represents learning to let go while maintaining connection. She had to accept that her daughter was no longer just hers, that Persephone had grown and changed and needed different things. This mirrors the challenge that parents face when their children become adults: how to maintain loving relationships while respecting autonomy and independence. Demeter's journey from desperate grief to acceptance shows us that love sometimes means stepping back and trusting the process. The myth also offers practical wisdom for managing work-life balance and preventing burnout. Just as Persephone alternates between her roles as queen of the underworld and daughter of Demeter, we need to find rhythms that allow us to engage deeply with our responsibilities while also taking time for rest and renewal. The seasonal cycle reminds us that sustainability requires periods of activity and periods of rest, times of giving and times of receiving. For those dealing with long-distance relationships, co-parenting arrangements, or any situation that requires navigating separation and reunion, Persephone's story offers a framework for making it work. It shows that love can survive and even thrive across different worlds when there's mutual respect, clear agreements, and trust in the process. The key is focusing on the quality of connection rather than the quantity of time spent together. The seasonal metaphor also speaks to the cyclical nature of healing and growth. Just as spring always follows winter, periods of difficulty and darkness in our lives are followed by renewal and growth. This doesn't mean we should passively wait for things to get better, but rather that we can trust in our capacity for resilience and regeneration. The myth encourages us to work with our natural rhythms rather than against them. In our modern world of artificial lighting, climate control, and 24/7 connectivity, we've lost touch with these natural cycles. We try to maintain constant productivity and emotional equilibrium, but the myth of Persephone reminds us that this isn't sustainable or healthy. We need our winters, times of rest, reflection, and retreat, just as much as we need our springs of growth and renewal. The story also highlights the importance of negotiation and compromise in resolving conflicts. Zeus's intervention shows that sometimes we need outside perspective to find solutions that work for everyone involved. The final arrangement wasn't anyone's first choice, but it created a sustainable balance that honored everyone's needs. This is a powerful lesson for anyone dealing with family conflicts, relationship challenges, or workplace disputes. As we conclude Hades' story, we see a god who transformed from a lonely, desperate figure into someone capable of mature love and partnership. His journey reminds us that our darkest moments don't define us. They're opportunities for growth and change. The seasonal cycle he helped create continues to govern our world, reminding us daily that balance, patience, and trust in natural rhythms are essential for sustainable happiness. The myth of Hades and Persephone ultimately teaches us that love isn't about finding someone to complete us or fix our loneliness. It's about learning to be whole ourselves while creating space for deep connection with others. It's about respecting boundaries, embracing cycles, and trusting that even the darkest winters eventually give way to spring. Let's talk about Athena, the goddess who literally embodies the phrase, born ready, in the most extreme way possible. Her origin story is wild even by Greek mythology standards. She sprang fully grown from Zeus's head, complete with armor, weapons, and the wisdom of ages. No childhood, no awkward teenage years, no gradual learning process. Just instant adult perfection. If that doesn't scream gifted kid syndrome and impossible expectations, I don't know what does. The circumstances of Athena's birth reveal so much about the pressure she would carry throughout her existence. Zeus had swallowed her mother, Metis, the goddess of wisdom, because of a prophecy that their child would be more powerful than him. So, Athena was literally born from her father's anxiety about being surpassed, emerging from his head like the ultimate daddy's girl who never had a chance to disappoint him. She was the solution to his fear, the child who would be powerful enough to be impressive but loyal enough to never threaten his authority. Think about the psychological implications of this origin story. Athena never experienced the normal developmental stages that help us learn boundaries, make mistakes, and gradually build confidence. She was expected to be wise, strategic, and perfect from the moment she existed. She's every gifted child who was told they were mature for their age. and then struggled with the burden of constant high expectations. She's the kid who never got to be a kid, who was thrust into adult responsibilities before she had the emotional tools to handle them. The absence of a mother figure in Athena's life is particularly significant. Metis was consumed before Athena was born, leaving her without the nurturing, emotional guidance that mothers traditionally provide. Instead, she was raised entirely by Zeus, absorbing his values of power, strategy, and intellectual achievement. This created a goddess who excelled at traditionally masculine domains, warfare, politics, and rational thinking, but who sometimes struggled with the softer skills of emotional intelligence and interpersonal connection. Athena's immediate emergence as a fully formed adult also meant she never learned how to be vulnerable or ask for help. She was born knowing everything she needed to know, which sounds like a blessing, but was actually a curse. How do you form genuine relationships when you've never experienced the mutual learning and growth that comes from shared vulnerability? How do you connect with others when you've never had the experience of not knowing something or needing guidance? This dynamic shows up in modern high achievers who struggle with perfectionism and imposter syndrome. Like Athena, they often feel like they have to have all the answers, that showing uncertainty or asking for help is a sign of weakness. They carry the weight of others' expectations while battling their own internal pressure to maintain an image of competence and control. The fear of disappointing people or revealing their humanity becomes a constant source of stress. Athena's relationship with Zeus also reflects the complicated dynamics of being the favorite child. She was his pride and joy, the daughter who validated his intelligence and strategic thinking. But this favoritism came with strings attached. She had to remain loyal, supportive, and never challenge his authority. She was powerful, but her power was always in service to his agenda. She could be wise and strategic, but only within the boundaries he set. This mirrors the experience of many high-achieving women who find themselves in positions of influence, but discover that their success is conditional on not threatening the men in power. They can be smart, capable, and successful as long as they don't outshine their male colleagues or challenge the existing power structure. Athena's story shows us how even divine favor can become a golden cage when it comes with unspoken expectations and limitations. The armor and weapons that Athena was born with also symbolize the defensive posture she had to maintain throughout her life. She was literally born ready for battle, which suggests that she always expected to have to fight for her place and prove her worth. This constant state of readiness for conflict is exhausting and prevents the kind of relaxed, authentic relationships that nurture the soul. She was always on, always performing, always ready to defend her position. For Gen Z, who are growing up in an era of intense academic competition, social media pressure, and economic uncertainty, Athena's story feels particularly relevant. Many young people today feel like they have to be perfect from the start, that there's no room for mistakes or gradual learning. They're expected to have their lives figured out, to be constantly productive, and to excel in multiple areas simultaneously. The pressure to be born ready for adulthood is creating a generation of anxious perfectionists who struggle with the same issues Athena faced. Athena's birth from Zeus's head also represents the privileging of rational thought over emotional intelligence. She was the goddess of wisdom, but it was a very specific type of wisdom, strategic, logical, and analytical. She excelled at solving problems and winning battles, but she sometimes struggled with the messier aspects of human emotion and relationship. This reflects our culture's tendency to value intellectual achievement over emotional development, creating people who are brilliant but emotionally stunted. The myth also highlights the pressure that comes with being seen as naturally gifted. Because Athena was born with her abilities, people assumed that everything came easily to her. They didn't see the effort, the pressure, or the isolation that came with her position. This is something many gifted individuals experience. Others assume their success is effortless, which makes it harder to seek support or acknowledge their struggles. Despite these challenges, Athena's story also shows us the power of channeling pressure into purpose. She took the expectations placed on her and used them to become a force for justice and wisdom in the world. She became a mentor to heroes, a protector of cities, and a champion of strategic thinking over brute force. Her journey shows us that while we can't control the circumstances of our birth or the expectations others place on us, we can choose how to use our gifts in service of something greater than ourselves. As we continue exploring Athena's story, we'll see how she navigated the challenges of being born into perfection and found ways to create meaning and connection despite the isolation that came with her unique position. Her journey offers hope for anyone who has ever felt the weight of impossible expectations or struggled with the burden of being seen as naturally gifted. She shows us that even gods have to learn how to be human. Picture this. You're competing for the most prestigious position in ancient Greece. Patron deity of Athens, the most influential city-state in the ancient world. Your competition is Poseidon, god of the seas, earthquakes, and horses, who also happens to be your uncle and one of the most powerful gods in the pantheon. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the entire future of a civilization hangs on your performance in what amounts to the ultimate job interview. This is the situation Athena found herself in, and her response would define not just her legacy, but the values of Western civilization itself. The contest between Athena and Poseidon for the patronage of Athens is essentially a masterclass in different approaches to leadership and problem-solving. The Athenians needed a patron deity who would guide their city toward prosperity and greatness, and they decided to let the gods compete by offering gifts that would benefit the city. It was like a divine pitch meeting where each god had to demonstrate their value proposition and vision for the future. Poseidon went first, and his approach was exactly what you'd expect from a god who rules through raw power. He struck the ground with his trident and created either a horse or a saltwater spring, depending on which version of the myth you follow. Both gifts were impressive displays of divine power. Horses were valuable for warfare and transportation, and water was essential for life. But here's the thing. The horse was primarily useful for war, and the saltwater spring was beautiful but ultimately impractical for daily life. Poseidon's gifts represented the flashy, immediate impact approach to leadership. He was essentially saying, "Look at my power. Look at what I can create instantly. Choose me and you'll have impressive displays of strength." It's the leadership style that focuses on grand gestures, dramatic announcements, and showing off capabilities rather than thinking through long-term consequences. In modern terms, he was the candidate who promises quick fixes and impressive results without considering sustainability or practical implementation. Athena's approach was completely different. She knelt down and planted an olive tree, a simple, unassuming gift that didn't immediately scream divine power. No lightning bolts, no earthquakes, no dramatic displays of supernatural ability. Just a tree. But this tree represented something profound. It was a gift that would keep giving for generations. Olive trees provide food, oil for cooking and lighting, wood for building, and they can live for hundreds of years. The olive tree was also a symbol of peace, wisdom, and prosperity. Unlike the horse, which was primarily useful for warfare, the olive tree represented the possibility of thriving without constant conflict. It suggested a future where Athens could prosper through trade, diplomacy, and cultural achievement, rather than just military conquest. Athena was essentially offering a vision of sustainable success based on wisdom, patience, and long-term thinking. The Athenians' choice reveals something beautiful about human nature and what we truly value when we're thinking clearly. Despite Poseidon's impressive display of power and his status as one of the most feared gods in the pantheon, they chose Athena's humble olive tree. They recognized that true leadership isn't about flashy demonstrations of power. It's about providing practical solutions that improve people's daily lives. They chose substance over style, sustainability over spectacle. This decision reflects the kind of wisdom that Gen Z is desperately seeking in their leaders today. In an era of social media politicians who prioritize viral moments over policy substance, and business leaders who chase quarterly profits over long-term sustainability, Athena's approach feels revolutionary. She represents the leader who thinks beyond the immediate impact to consider how their decisions will affect future generations. The contest also highlights the difference between masculine and feminine approaches to power and leadership. Poseidon's gift was about dominance, control, and impressive displays of strength. Athena's gift was about nurturing, sustainability, and creating conditions for others to thrive. This doesn't mean that all men lead like Poseidon or all women lead like Athena, but it does suggest that there are different models of effective leadership that we should consider. For Athena personally, winning this contest was validation of her approach to life and leadership. She had always been the strategic thinker, the one who preferred wisdom to warfare, planning to impulse. But in a family of gods who often acted on emotion and ego, her measured approach was sometimes seen as less impressive or exciting. The Athenians' choice proved that her way of thinking wasn't just valid, it was valuable. The victory also established Athena as a patron of democracy and civic engagement. Athens became the birthplace of democratic ideals partly because their patron goddess valued wisdom, debate, and thoughtful decision-making over autocratic rule. The olive tree became a symbol not just of peace and prosperity, but of the kind of society that prioritizes education, philosophy, and rational discourse. In our modern context, Athena's victory offers hope for anyone who has ever felt like their thoughtful, measured approach to problems is less valued than flashier, more aggressive tactics. It reminds us that sustainable success comes from careful planning, consideration of long-term consequences, and focus on creating value for others rather than just impressing them. Her story validates the introverted leaders, the strategic thinkers, and the people who prefer to let their work speak for itself. The contest also teaches us about the importance of understanding your audience and their real needs. Athena didn't just offer what she thought was impressive, she offered what the Athenians actually needed for long-term prosperity. She listened to their concerns, understood their challenges, and provided a solution that addressed their fundamental needs rather than just their immediate wants. For Gen Z, who are inheriting a world facing climate change, economic inequality, and social division, Athena's approach offers a model for the kind of leadership they need to develop. It's about thinking beyond the next quarter or the next election cycle to consider how decisions will affect future generations. It's about choosing sustainable solutions over quick fixes and wisdom over spectacle. As we continue exploring Athena's story, we'll see how her victory in Athens shaped her role as a goddess of justice and wisdom. But for now, let's celebrate this moment when thoughtful leadership triumphed over flashy displays of power, and when a community chose the gift that would nurture them for generations to come. As we conclude our journey through these ancient stories, remember that, like Athena's olive tree, the most valuable gifts are often the simplest ones that keep giving over time. Whether you're facing your own underworld like Hades or competing for recognition like Athena, trust in the power of wisdom, patience, and authentic service. These ancient gods remind us that our struggles are universal, our growth is possible, and our stories matter. Sweet dreams, and may you find your own olive tree to plant in this world.